I had a discussion the other day with. I'm going to get geeky for a minute. Nerdy,
Okay.
not geeky. Um, I had a discussion the other day with a friend of mine, and he he was arguing for that COVID was really, really bad, and I was, I haven't been paying attention to the last month or two to the numbers. Like I stopped paying attention to the numbers mostly, and so I was kind of unprepared to have the conversation. And he was like, apparent, and he's the kind of guy who gets basically all his news from mainstream media. So he made this argument of, well, the overall death count is much higher this year, and you can't argue with that. Like, it doesn't, because I was saying like, well, there's comorbidity causes and blah blah blah, and I knew some of the details, and he was like, yeah, but if you just look at the total number of people that have died versus who normally dies in this year, there's way more, and therefore we know there's a problem. And I was like, well, that's actually a pretty compelling argument. What are the numbers? Of course, I was like, what are the numbers? How do you find them? Now, incidentally, it's extremely difficult to find simple
Mhm.
numbers for any of this stuff. It's really hard. It's almost as if no one wants you to find the numbers
Yeah.
yourself. They want you to only trust the experts. But I did find some numbers. I want to share just a COVID update. I want to share a couple things with you. I get this is going to be nerdy, and I apologize, but I'm going to try and make it as non-nerdy as possible.
I like nerdy. Let's do it.
All right. So here's my raw spreadsheet. I did not have time to make this beautiful. We're not gonna look at the numbers in the raw spreadsheet. I'm just gonna explain it to you for a second. So what I did is I went to I got populations by year. I looked at some CDC numbers, and what I did was I looked at per month from the year 1999 to the year 2019. How many people died per month? So this is the raw data from the CDC. Now you can argue you don't trust CDC data, but whatever. Okay. So that's the raw data. And I also got the population estimate every year. And the reason I got the population estimate is comparing raw data from 1999 to 2019 or 2020 doesn't make sense because there's more people. So what I wanted to do was find out the actual rates. So I said, okay, well, what's the death rate per 100,000 people? And I calculated the death rate for all those years. Then I calculated the average death rate for each month, figuring maybe there's differences between months. So what's the average death rate for each month? And you just see it varies a little bit. Okay, it's the average death rate every month. And that's for, again, 1999 through 2019. That's a 21-year window, roughly 20-year window. And I, just for shits and kicks, I calculated the standard deviation so that I could see, okay, 78 with a standard deviation of 4.72, 69 with a standard deviation of 2.7. Okay, so then I said, all right, what if we look at this and we take the current population and we multiply it by what we expect? What's our expected, without COVID, what would our expected deaths be per month? And they are here. Sorry, I didn't fix this, but this is January, February, March, April, right? So they're here. And I
Can you
looked
say
at,
what that number is? Because I'm having trouble seeing it on my
sorry,
screen.
well, the important thing is going to be the difference anyway. So
Okay.
I looked at this and I said, okay, well, how do they compare? I said, okay, well, when I first looked at this, I said, okay, well, our expected, so for example, January 256,000, February 229,000, March 244,000. I said, okay, well, what do the CDC say the data actually is? And the CDC said, well, it's 263,000, 243,000, and 268,000. And so if I look at that, I said there is a difference. And it looks like there was some deaths early on that were higher than normal. In fact, in January, less than a standard deviation away from norm. In February, more than a standard deviation. And in March, way more than a standard deviation. But then I went to the actual human mortality database because these CDC numbers for 2020 are kind of weird because they don't, and they're only the first 3 months, and I wanted more data. And the human mortality database has data all the way through August, and their numbers are slightly different. Their numbers are 238, 230, 280, 215. They go all the way through August. And their rates are comparable. I'm going to skip all this data and show you the graph, because the graph's the best way to see this. So the average, now remember the average is going to be more smooth because it's 20 years averaged together, right? The average death, now I'm comparing death rates. The average death rate per 100,000 people is this blue line. Here's January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. The red line is 2020. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. A little bit more variance in this year, but that's to be expected because we're comparing it against an average where there's going to be less variance likely. And this doesn't really look like there's a huge problem this year. I don't see this huge difference in death rate this year. And it turns out, lucky me, someone else did this too. There's Our World in Data, which you can look at, and they analyzed excess mortality. And what you see is this kind of matches a mix of my two analyses, but there was some early on, there was some deaths. The death rate was higher, mortality, and then it kind of dropped, and we're almost back to kind of normal. So there were some deaths that were above average. Now, their average is only 2015 to 2019, and they're doing raw death numbers, not death rate. So I would say my method is better because I'm comparing apples to apples more than they are. And actually, my method makes these lines closer together, oddly enough. But this is
Can you tell anybody who's confused why raw death numbers are different than death rate? It's because the population grows.
Yeah, because the population is not constant, right? So if you have 100 million people and half of them die, that's different than if you have 1 billion people and 50 million die, right? It's the same raw number, but obviously one is much worse than the other.
You get better information to look at the rate.
Right. So I was looking at the rate, right? So my stuff this is the death rate. And this is the raw deaths. And I can tell everyone where I got all this data. I just did the analysis myself. This isn't rocket science. And it's not, I'm not presupposing anything about coronavirus. I'm not trying to figure out like, oh, this number was like, there's comorbidities and this and that. This has nothing to do with COVID. This is just how many people die every January, how many people die every February, just counting them up and using publicly available data. And, my summary is it looks like there was an increase in death earlier on, and it looks like we're kind of settling out to about where we were. And it's the difference isn't that dramatic. So I don't know what you want to conclude from that other than what we've already concluded, which is they really love pandemics because they want to control us and force us to wear masks and do all this other stuff. But I think
it's like Sue said, this is a giant experiment in control.
Yes. Right. And El Vicaro in chat says, to be fair, you need to take into account drops in other things like auto accident deaths. Yeah. So there is going to be there's an assumption built into comparing year to year, which is you're assuming that all the other deaths are averaging out to near null. They're canceling themselves out in some way. Maybe you should argue the death rate should be decreasing every year, and it's not. So I guess you could do a more detailed analysis there. But this isn't, I think pretty clearly, you don't look at this and say, this is a zombie apocalypse. You don't look at this and say, this is a massive pandemic. You look at this and say, yeah, there's an issue, but it's kind of what we've been saying all along. It's not the flu, but this isn't a catastrophe. It's really not a catastrophe. And I don't think the numbers bear out any analysis that's like, so many people are dying. It's it's crazy. Like, I don't think that's true. That doesn't appear to be true. So Taxera says, never let a good crisis go to waste. I just wanted to share that with people because it was something that was bothering me because I haven't been looking at the numbers, and I think it matters. And there you go.